Houston,
Hello, Jonah.
it's time to talk about climate change.
Welcome to Quibbles Over Coffee, everyone. We're going to be talking about climate change this episode. How exciting.
How exciting. So,
How
okay.
very exciting.
A couple days ago, we released our video. I've decided, at the time that we recorded this, we had not released it yet, but I've decided that a couple days before releasing this one, we're going to have released our views and why at least I support, I'm not sure about you, but I definitely support the carbon dividend. I think that's the best policy for
That's not out yet?
for climate change. Is that not out yet? Is that out yet?
I don't know.
There's so many things that are just
it's okay. It's okay.
out there in the ether.
Yeah.
Maybe it's out, maybe it's not. By the time this is released,
it definitely will be before this one.
It will be before this one. That's the point that matters. And so, oh, you're right. No, it is released, right? It's who knows. The point is,
anyway,
the point is that it will have been released. And
let's give a quick breakdown of what the carbon dividend is.
The carbon dividend is you have to pay a fee every time that you pollute my air because it's fucking my air, and you're allowed to sort of steal the air out of my lungs. You're allowed to asphyxiate me so long as you pay me.
Right.
And so that's something that's been supported by Janet Yellen. She's a really important person. She's about to become Treasury Secretary, first woman to be Treasury Secretary. She's also the founder. I don't know if she's literally the only founder, if she's one of the co-founders of the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a really important carbon dividend supporting organization. And so she's a powerhouse. She's very, 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 very gung-ho on the carbon dividend specifically. The reason the carbon dividend matters so much beyond sort of the Georgist in me, which is definitely a component of it, but the larger reason is that it's something that's able to be levied internationally much better than I worry a lot of other things are. That being said, she is not the one who's directly responsible for climate. Instead, John Kerry is. So for those who don't know John Kerry ran for president in 2004. He lost, obviously, to Bush, Bush W. Bush, whatever.
Baby Bush.
Baby Bush, yes, the child one, stupid one, the one who got us into a war with Iraq. Oh, wait, that was both of them. Yeah.
The one who has a movie.
He has a movie?
Yeah, Journeys with George. We watched it in one of our classes in high school. It's very fun. It's definitely a movie you get stoned to and watch, and it's very entertaining.
That's quite interesting. I support those. I support those movies. Those are good movies.
Right.
Yeah. So that's who John Kerry is.
He's also a senator, I think, from Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. At one point he was. And then he was also the Secretary of State at one point under Obama. The fact that he has this position suggests that Biden is taking climate change much more seriously than virtually any other, actually literally any other president in the history of our country. Unless you're going to count like the people who founded our national parks, but that wasn't really climate change. It was more, it wasn't really climate.
Don't destroy our land.
Ensuring public lands.
Yeah.
And the Bureau of Land Management is obviously very important. Whatever. The point is that he's taking it very seriously. He's taking it very seriously, and I also think that Kerry brings with him a degree of prestige and importance that even if Biden hadn't already created this job specifically for him, he would already have a good deal of leeway in terms of what he wants. So it does matter what Kerry thinks. That said, it also matters obviously even more what Biden thinks. So with that said, let's pull up what Biden thinks, or at least what Biden told us he thought when he was running for president.
Sure. Those are two very different things.
Yes.
Anyway.
Fortunately so.
So, can you see it?
I can see it. All right.
The Biden plan to build a modern, sustainable infrastructure and an equitable, clean energy future. Wow.
Yes.
Big letters, big font. All right. Are we going to read the whole thing, or are we just going to
We're going to read we're going to scroll down a little bit. There's some of this that matters. There's some of this that doesn't. We're definitely going to read the headlines of it. We're not going to give you money. You're already president. You already have made Donald Trump. How is that still up?
Yeah, I know.
Together we can make Donald Trump a one-term president. He's literally no longer president at the time that we're recording this. Whatever.
Yeah.
Scroll down more. This is not where we need to be. I love you.
Okay.
More scrolling.
Scrolling.
Stop.
Here?
Yeah, this is the
Biden
one.
will make a far-reaching investment in.
Yes. So I think this is profoundly incorrect. Like
You don't think
profoundly
he should
incorrect.
make investments in infrastructure, auto industry, and transit?
I of course think he should, but I think that framing that as the basis of your climate policy is like profoundly incorrect.
All
Like
right.
the problem is that for us to actually tackle this, we need to have this be tackled internationally. And in defense of Kerry, obviously, as Secretary of State, has had a great deal of dealings with in an international context. When you're in a place like Guatemala, when he was Secretary of State, there were constantly newspaper clippings about him. People knew him as well as they knew Obama. He is well known and well regarded internationally in a way that very few other people are in our entire country. But that said, like um, there's nothing that he has right now under this policy. When you're talking about infrastructure and auto industry, and you're talking about transit, this is all domestic policy. And
Yeah.
the truth is that domestic climate change, right, is it's a small fraction. It's a outsized fraction comparative to our to the size of our population. In comparison with the rest of the world, right, we have more influence per capita on climate change than other countries. But nonetheless, we're a small percentage of the overall problem of climate change. The majority of the problem of climate change is international. And so particularly as places like China and India grow, we're going to see them, increase even further the amount of climate change that they're responsible for, and that's very scary. And this focus on infrastructure, while it's nice just from a domestic tranquility perspective, I don't think that's actually the basis of fixing climate change. I think the basis of fixing climate change is ensuring that we have financial incentives such that other countries are incentivized likewise not to fuck themselves and fuck us through climate change. This auto industry stuff is marginally good, right? He's talking about trying to get
Why don't we read them?
Yeah, go for it. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, infrastructure, create millions of good union jobs, rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure. Yeah. From roads and bridges to green spaces and water systems to electricity grids and universal broadband to lay a new foundation for sustainable growth, complete in the global economy, withstand the impacts of climate change, and improve public health, including access to clean air and clean water.
Yeah, so like some of that is valid. Other parts of
Sure.
that are like bullshit. Like the idea of like universal broadband. Like, I'm sorry, I think we should have universal broadband. That has nothing to do with climate change.
Right.
Literally nothing to do with climate change at all. You're lying.
Yeah.
Right. And so like it's not like it's just Biden who has a tendency to do this. This is true across the board of like virtually every politician. But
Right.
there's a tendency when you're talking about something in the context of your campaign to just make like all of your stuff sort of blend into itself,
Right.
and just like there's no real like here's my climate policy.
No.
You're constantly talking about like, oh well, I also want universal broadband. And everyone says, I like universal broadband. I guess that's the solution to climate change. Because they don't understand what climate change is. And even if they do, they don't really care. The point is that like, yeah, there's a lot of this that is just not important. The
and
auto
also like
industry
creating
stuff.
the jobs and stuff for
Mhm.
like is helpful, but it's not like what we need for a climate policy. Which is
Yeah,
like it's good. Like I would like to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure because it's definitely
for
crumbling.
sure. Yeah.
But yeah. All right.
The auto industry stuff, I have a years at this point. It's like 2.5 year long struggle with my friend. He's very smart. He works at Uber,
Mhm.
and I love him to death. But he is convinced that self-driving cars are somehow like going to transition into actually having public transit, which would be great, right? Because we do need more public transit. And
Sure.
he's convinced that like once we have self-driving cars, we're going to have independent fleets, and those independent fleets are going to get he has a whole like train of thought there, and I think that it makes some degree of sense. But the problem is that is not what Biden is saying. Biden is saying we're going to have 1 million new jobs in the auto industry, which like I'm sorry. Number one, we're not. Number two, we shouldn't. Right? Like
Yeah.
no,
Sure.
that's not going to
Right.
happen. Like
Yeah.
the problem is that when we talk about the auto industry particularly, but more broadly manufacturing, there's this assumption that the reason there are fewer jobs is because those are jobs being shipped overseas. Like, no, that's wrong. Like, that's part of it, sure, I guess, kind of, but the broader problem is that we're just industrializing. Like, the
Yeah.
number of people required to create the same number of goods is just drastically decreasing
Yeah.
because of better automation. And the truth is that we're never going to have the side, like, Chicago is never going to be what Chicago was with respect to cars
No.
60 years ago. It's just never going to happen again. It's not a real thing. And it's frustrating that that's sort of a focus. Now, when we're talking about electric vehicle charging stations, that's like somewhat more valid, right? That is something, like, it's also true, particularly if we start to build out solar, that there are going to be a lot of solar jobs, in terms of and those are going to be like good, middle class jobs. Those are jobs that are going to be able to provide people, because all you're doing is like putting them up on the roof, right? But that's like a pretty difficult technical thing to do.
You
And
need people to
obviously
do.
you need people to do it. You can't have a
Yeah.
machine do that. And I think that's something that we can look to as a valuable basis. But the idea of the auto industry as
Yeah.
being the solution to climate change, like, you're just lying. It's not even that you're
Yeah.
wrong, you're lying, and it's very
Yeah.
frustrating. um yeah.
Yeah.
All
And it's
right.
just like uh it's not the same. Like it's not 100 years
Yeah,
ago.
exactly,
But like
exactly. It just assumes that the economy is like stagnant, and it's
but
just
I'm
not.
also do the people who are like complaining about these jobs know that? Like I'm sure they know that they're losing their jobs because of automation and not because like the company is moving.
Yeah, so here's the problem.
So like who is this for?
This is for people in Pennsylvania, and that's me. I'm in Pennsylvania, but this is for people who are more rural portions of Pennsylvania than I am. This is for the Scrantons, right? Which is where he's from.
Mm,
Biden's from, and
right.
and so, I think that there's a correct assessment in both the Democrat and Republican parties that there are a lot of people who have been left behind in the Rust Belt, in terms of our job security,
Right.
as a lot of older industries have fallen by the wayside, due to automation and due to, again, mostly automation, but also to an extent international trade, which
Sure.
I just don't buy that part, as being nearly the degree to which I think it gets credit for, wrongly.
Yeah.
But that really concerns me, because those jobs aren't coming back.
Yeah,
And
but I guess my question is why do we tell them that we're going to get their non-existent job back instead of like being like, "Hey, we like this shit's dead, but you can do this other shit."
it's hard. They can't. There aren't that. Here's the problem. What we're talking about right now is a bunch of people who have worked in, car manufacturing, for the last 20 years. At this point, they are 65 years old, right?
Mhm.
And they have, probably not a fantastic education, but they were solidly middle class.
Mhm.
Um, and now here they are, right? They're older. They are not as technically gifted as people like you and me. They're not as sort of fresh. And so, from the perspective of a business, like, why the fuck would you choose to have someone, if you're going to be like, a tech company? Why would you
Yeah.
want the 65-year-old who doesn't even understand like Facebook well, doesn't really understand how to like use, Twitter, right? Why would you choose that person when you can have someone fresh out of college who is probably cheaper, right? Is definitely more able to move from point A to point B because they don't have a family tying them down, right? They're much more easy to, and so for all of
Yeah.
these reasons, like, from the perspective of companies, for a perspective of employers, there's just not a reason that they would choose these older people, particularly older men, who are, desperately impoverished all of a sudden after having a solid middle class lifestyle for the last 25, 30 years, working in manufacturing, working in coal, working in all of these sort of falling by the wayside, industries of the Rust Belt, and that's really scary. So I on the one hand, obviously, on a factual level, can say sort of flippantly that yeah, of course, this create 1 million new jobs in the American auto industry is just laughably not going to happen.
Sure.
But it's really not a laughing matter. It really is a
No.
problem that those jobs aren't going to come back. And so I do see the solar industry as somewhat of a bright spot, because it is true that those are jobs that can be done by people with relatively low skill, right? But do require a good deal of responsibility, right? And so for a variety of reasons, I do think that those are jobs that are more likely to go to older people who have a proven track record in business, even if not in that particular business, because the skills can be learned, but it's more about the responsibility that matters, because they are required to be handling pretty expensive equipment, and they are required to be, showing up consistently and dealing with people's homes and dealing with customers in a way that frankly, a 22-year-old is probably less apt to do successfully. So I do think that is a bright spot. But it's also true that like Pennsylvania is not the sunniest place in the country, right? Like that's a bigger answer to Arizona than it is to Pennsylvania. It's a bigger answer to New Mexico than it is to New York, or to Iowa, right? So I do think that it's a real problem, and I don't have a real solution to it.
Yeah, so I guess in the meantime we'll lie to them with this
well, I mean, right?
Because it's like you're lying to them, and then like you promise shit you can't do, and then once your term's over, it's like you promised me this shit, like then you become bitter, and then when someone comes along and says we're gonna fuck them, like sure you're gonna be like it's just a cycle.
I just don't think there is a good answer. I mean, like there's a lot of naive capitalist fervor that assumes that and it assumes that like the way capitalism works is that when people don't have jobs, like jobs will find them somehow,
right?
Which is just like, it's not true, because like the way that the supply and demand functions is that the supply is increasing every year of new college graduates, and there are very few industries that want to choose a 65-year-old who doesn't know what they're doing over a 22-year-old who also doesn't know what they're doing, because the 22-year-old will be with them potentially for the next 30 years, right? That 22-year-old is very easily able to move from state to state, from country to country, right? If I got a good enough job and it was in Canada or it was in New Zealand, I might take it, right? Because like there's nothing holding me here. It's not like I have kids in the school system. It's not like I have any of, so like I can do that, right? And that's just not true of people who are built in, have really designed their lives to the extent of most 65-year-olds. It's hard to like move from a town over, right? Let alone try to have the upheaval that would be required to get them a job of equivalent economic status, because like there are jobs that would hire them in New Mexico. It's true. If people were willing to move from Pennsylvania to New Mexico, there are jobs that would hire, but it's just it's naive to assume that people can easily and willingly do that in the same way when they're 65 as when they're our age. All
right.
It's a real problem, and I don't have a real solution.
Problem. We'll have to talk about it in a future episode.
That's fair.
For now, let's move on to transit.
Transit is real. Transit is real.
Provide every American city with 100,000 or more residents with high quality, zero emissions public transportation options through flexible federal investments with strong labor protections that create good union jobs and meet the needs of these cities, ranging from light rail networks to improving existing transit and bus lines to installing infrastructure for pedestrian and bicyclists.
Houston.
Yeah.
If I have to suck Joe Biden's penis like Monica Lewinsky, okay? If I have to hide underneath the fucking desk in the Oval Office for a month and a half, okay? And just lick his ball sack repeatedly, okay? Without stopping, okay? If I am kept from sleeping, okay? If they chain me, okay, up and they keep me there and I'm not allowed to eat except for like this stale bread, okay, for a year and a half. But Joe Biden does that, I will be so happy. I will be so happy.
Oh my
It's
god, that
not
was
even
so
funny.
funny.
Oh my god.
That was so
That's
good.
amazing. That's
Ugh.
amazing. What they're describing there is beautiful. That shit is a work of art. That is a work of art, Houston. It is orgasmically perfect. I love it.
I mean, you're
Perfect.
someone who literally in our previous episode talked about how much he hates slavery, are willing to be enslaved for this piece of text to come to light.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Listen,
not only be
it's not
enslaved, to be a
slavery.
sex slave.
It's not slavery if it's consensual. Okay?
That's true.
And I
That's
would
true.
happily consent to whatever the fuck Joe Biden wants to do with my nubile body if he would do that shit. Okay? Okay? I'm totally serious. I am 100% serious. That is beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
so why does this paragraph get you so horny?
So hard. It gets me so hard.
Why?
Because it's okay.
Why?
What he's describing here. Okay. Let's break it down.
Okay.
Every American city with 100,000 or more residents. That's a lot of cities. So for perspective, like that's not literally half of our population yet, but that's close to half of our population. I think it's like 40 some odd percent of our population. I don't want to get the exact number off. And so like, you know, that's a real portion of our society.
Yeah, it's a lot of
That's a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people, right? That are going to be affected by this. Someone's calling me. They need to show. No. I can't talk to you right now. And so that's really, really, really valuable.
Yeah.
Right. Makes me very happy in that sense. And then also we're talking about this as a zero emission public transport options across the board. And he's specifically talking about installing infrastructure for pedestrian and bicyclists. When we talk about pedestrians and bicyclists, we're talking about building up a walkable city, building up cities specifically through light rail networks. All of this, right, makes it a more livable environment for poor people, makes it more livable environment for younger people, makes it more livable environment for people with disabilities, who for whatever reason can't drive, makes it so that we are going to have fewer people driving writ large. The fact that that we're going to have fewer people driving writ large itself represents literally tens of thousands of lives saved every year, right? I don't think people like recognize usually just how deadly the use of cars is, right? We're talking about 45,000 people die every single fucking year in our country alone. Over 3 million people die internationally, worldwide, because of car accidents. We're talking about tens of thousands of people's lives saved because of this. This is extraordinarily important, and also I have no fucking clue how this has anything to do with energy. It has anything to do with climate change. Like, yes, it's true that we're going to decrease the number of cars, and by decreasing the number of cars, that does mean that there's going to be less carbon emissions there. But the percentage of carbon emissions that are coming from our use of cars that are already on the road is a very small portion of the totality of the auto emissions. Auto emissions, the vast majority of auto emissions don't actually come from the use, but rather the manufacturing. Right, that's something like I think it's like 65-ish% of the total life cycle of cars is in terms of climate emissions is done at their manufacturing level. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've been droning on for a while. What were you saying?
No, I'm just it I don't think it's heavy with the climate change. I think the car thing is important, and I think if we get more people walking and more people using this zero emissions public transit, it'll be helpful. And if we are able to get like a transit system that's more like we talked about, have we talked about it yet in the preview? Well, we'll talk about it at some point. Having like a larger scale countrywide transit system would help to go to that future as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But
so yeah, I think that's really powerful and really important.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Next one.
Sure. Power sector. Move ambitiously to generate clean American-made electricity to achieve a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035. This will enable us to meet the existential threat of climate change while creating millions of jobs with a choice to join a union. That is bullshit. Doesn't mean anything. That one, he's not actually saying anything. He's just saying that
I
we
felt
want it
that
to
when
happen
we,
by 2035. That doesn't mean anything. We can move on.
when I read power sector, I was like, this seems like it's not important.
Yeah, it's not important at all.
That
That part's
was
bullshit.
correct.
Yeah,
All right.
buildings. Upgrade 4 million buildings and weatherize 2 million homes over 4 years, creating at least 1 million good-paying jobs with choice to join a union, and also spur the building, retrofit, and efficient appliance manufacturing supply chain by funding direct cash rebates and low cost financing to upgrade the electrify home appliances and install more efficient windows, which will cut residential energy bills. So this part's valid. This is mostly not actually going to be done directly by the U.S. government. It's going to be done instead with a bunch of rebates and a bunch of sort of incentivizations of the private market. So Biden's not going to get fully as much credit as I think he might deserve on this, actually. But this is important. It's just also something that is not going to be particularly controversial because it's just a matter of passing a couple of pieces of legislation that encourage a bunch of private companies to do it. And the total cost of that is going to be, it's not really, cost isn't even really the right way of framing it. It's rather the money not brought into the government because it's going to be tax rebates and a bunch of that kind of stuff. And the amount of money that we're not going to be bringing into the government is probably going to be, ballpark a couple billion. It's not going to be serious money. So this is definitely a good thing, and I support it.
Okay. Housing. Spur the construction of 1.5 million sustainable homes and housing units.
Sure.
Okay.
Doesn't mean anything. Right?
Innovation.
The problem is
yeah,
if you did that,
what does that mean?
Exactly.
What is spur the construction of what?
Exactly. The problem is many of the things that, and this is not just Biden. Many of the things that people say when they're just listing their goals as president, particularly before they've been in office, is just nonsense. It's just this is what I want to have happen. And then there will be rainbows and everyone will love each other and we will have world peace and also everyone will be rich and there we go.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, sure. Yeah. Why not 15 million sustainable homes and housing units?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. What the fuck is spurring? If you're saying I will pay to have these built, right? That would be a conversation.
Sure.
If you're saying that I need a land value tax, so the land value tax does that spurring of the construction of 1.5 million sustainable homes. I'm not so sure about the sustainable actually, but specifically, certainly of 1.5 million homes and housing units, that definitely would happen if you had a land value tax sort of nationally levied and dictated across all states. Of course. I don't think that's reasonably going to happen anytime soon because it's not really how we've ever in our history done land taxation. We've always done it at the state level and at the local level, but that's fine. That's an example, right? Just simply saying spur the construction, fuck you. You don't mean anything. Innovation, drive dramatic cost reductions and critical energy. Fuck you. You're also not saying anything. Agriculture and conservation. This one's kind of a thing, create jobs in climate smart agriculture, resilience and conservation. So basically he's just saying we should, incentivize the creation of better agriculture, which sure. Right. Now he's also saying plugging abandoned oil and natural gas wells and reclaiming abandoned coal, hard rock and uranium mines. That part's pretty valid actually, because there are examples of leaking abandoned oil and natural gas wells, and those are very bad for the environment. Not so much for the climate, but for the local environment.
That doesn't sound great.
It's not good at all. I'm forgetting his name, but there's a very important oil magnate who's now spending all his money and going around sort of shutting down all of the old wells that he sort of himself was responsible for. But I'm blanking on his name, and that's moderate, unfortunate.
Thank you for cleaning up after your mess, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Environmental justice. Ensure that the environmental justice is a key consideration. Fuck you. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, so that's basically his plan.
All right, so we're good.
And he's going to take it seriously, which is important. I mean, obviously, anything is better than Trump, but I think he's even beyond what I expected, showing this is something that he's taking seriously. And the way he's doing that is he's talking about John Kerry. So if you can pull up John Kerry's like Wikipedia or some shit about John Kerry. John Kerry ran for president in 2004. He's a very important guy. He was Secretary of State. He's been a senator. He's very, very, very well established, certainly in the international affairs kind of world as well, beyond just sort of his sort of domestic audience and importance. So I think that the fact that he's been made the special presidential envoy for climate or whatever the fuck it's called, and that's a new position that was given to him by Biden. That suggests that this is going to be a position that he's going to take seriously, and I think that Kerry, in a way that other people might not, is going to have an ability to really affect this. I gotta say, without a climate dividend, without a carbon dividend, rather, we are not going to fix climate. So when we talk about like having a bunch of nice new trains, I love it.
Me too.
I love it so much. But
that's great.
Even though I would suck Joe Biden's penis to get it, repeatedly, and without pay, I want to make it clear that that's not actually like a solution to climate change.
Right.
That's a partial pausing or diminishing of the impact of the United States, but it's really not fixing the underlying problem. The underlying problem is that the incentivization, economically speaking, currently for companies writ large across the entire globe, as well as for countries writ large across the globe, is to just pollute as much as you possibly can, because that's not something that we account for in the context of our markets. And if we had a carbon dividend, we would account for it. We would account for that pollution as a component of our markets, and that would dramatically shift those markets very, very quickly, particularly as it's upticking in the price based on the amount of emissions.
So I'm guessing he is not for the carbon dividend.
So he's not, but again, Janet Yellen is, and Janet Yellen is a really important woman, and my hope is that Janet Yellen is able to get in Biden's face, start yelling. That was my Yellen joke. It was a little bit cringy, but I support it, and I stand by it. But like, yeah, I think that if she
they're gonna get together and start talking and start schmoozing, and she'll be like, hey, look at this climate policy that I got right here.
If she succeeds in getting us a carbon dividend, we are on track, I think, to actually not die, which would be good. That would be a new thing. Because for the last 4 years, we have been very much on track to die.
Right.
And I would like to stop being on track to die.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of something that would be very great.
Yeah.
If that happens, awesome. But I'm not convinced it's going to. I think that I would put the odds of us getting the climate dividend in the next 4 years, ballpark 20%, which is much lower than I want it to be.
Yeah. All right. So, anything else about this guy?
About Kerry specifically? I mean, if you scroll down, he's been very, very important in our international sort of affairs perspective for a very long period of time. Obviously, he served, and beyond that, he's been I think really important in sort of his framework. I think that he's broadly, I mean, he's an established Democrat, right? He's not going to be, I'm not saying that he's anything crazy, but I think broadly he's been a voice of reason that has pulled us out of wars. Obviously, in the 70s, he was much more involved. He was directly involved in the anti-war movement. But since then, I think he has done a pretty good job of being, at least comparative to like someone like a Hillary Clinton, less of a war hawk, less of a person who's sort of gung-ho on trying to get into more conflicts. And so in that sense, I think that he deserves some credit there. And it's also true that like he's broadly pretty well respected and pretty well liked internationally.
Okay.
And that is, again, a huge difference between him and like a Mike Pompeo from a couple months ago. It's a
Right.
big difference between the Trump administration and him, because I think that he is someone that people can get behind. So
Okay.
even without a carbon dividend, I think that he is likely to be able to get some amount of stuff, specifically from South America, to happen on climate change, which is marginally good. But like, I'm sorry, South America is not the problem, sweetheart. China's the problem, right? India is the problem, and the EU is the problem, and we're the problem.
Right.
And if we aren't able to get those real polluters on board, which I don't think he has the capacity to do unless he gets a climate dividend, or sorry, I keep on saying climate dividend. I don't know why. Carbon dividend.
Start with C, I guess.
Yeah, they do start with a C. You're right. You're right. Thank you for defending me from myself. Yeah, that basically I think describes him.
Okay. And then the last article. Are we going to talk about this other article?
Oh, sure. Yeah. This is not like radically important, but it is important just in as much as that Janet Yellen is definitely still part of the conversation. So if you scroll down, Janet Yellen, again,
Nice picture.
I really wish that Janet Yellen had Kerry's job right now. Because if Janet Yellen had Kerry's job right now, I also want her to be in charge of the Treasury moderately. Although again, she's not great on Bitcoin and on blockchain writ large. But if she were in charge of climate change, we would be in a much better place as a country. So this is talking about how she was the founding member of CLC. It's talking about sort of like her position on a carbon tax, and specifically a carbon dividend. And she's really important in that sense, and has been a real strong advocate for that sort of proposal. And I think that she if we succeed, it's going to be because of her.
Okay. Well, I guess we got to support Janet Yellen.
Support your Janet Yellen, but not on blockchain.
Yeah.
She's wrong on blockchain. That's a different episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Anything else before we wrap it up?
John Kerry is beautiful.
Okay.
Purely aesthetically.
Really?
You don't think? I think so.
He looks like a oh fuck.
He looks like a grizzled wolf.
He looks like a Team Fortress 2 character.
Interesting. I don't know Team Fortress 2.
I don't know that well either, but I know like the main guy from it has like he has like a very like like a rectangle face, and he's like yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know.
I support this. this. All right, that's about it.
Okay.
Like and subscribe. We adore you. You're all beautiful.
And comment, and we'll see you next time.